few years ago, I started having more and more sleep problems. And more recently, I wondered this question: am I getting enough deep sleep per night? So it's one of the specific levels of sleep as you go through sleep cycles. There's nicely enough trackers that give you a pretty good estimate of how much various stages of sleep you're getting. So I collected some data in order to answer this question. And really there were two situations. So the first possibility I knew could be reasonable would be the null hypothesis. Null means nothing. That's what that little zero there stands for sometimes when we write the symbol. And that would be that there's no difference between the amount of deep sleep I get on average and the minimum recommended 90 minutes per night, which is specifically for my age. In plain English, I get enough deep sleep. That's one possibility, and I knew that was one possibility. There's another possibility, and we call this the alternative hypothesis, research hypothesis. And that would be that I get less than the recommended 90 minutes sleep per night for my age. Now, if you're listening, or let me give you this in plain English, I don't get enough deep sleep. Now, there is a third option that if you're very perceptive, you may have picked up on, and that would be that I'm getting even more than the recommended amount. So not less than, no difference, not like exactly 90, but even more. This is what's called a one-tailed test because I really am only looking about this direction. Am I getting less than the 90 minutes of sleep? If I would be getting more than 90, like statistically more than 90 minutes, that would be great. If I'm getting my recommended amount, that would be great. So I kind of boil them together here in this null hypothesis situation. I phrase it as saying I'm getting right at that minimum recommended. But in reality, this also accounts for the situations where I would be getting more than enough sleep. Another way of putting this, the only way that my data will reject the null in this situation would be if I'm in this particular scenario. So this is really a yes-no kind of thing. And we answer this question yes or no, and this can be done with a p-value. Not for sure. This is inferential statistics. We're making an inference, a guess, but we can make a reasonable guess at this answer. So when I conducted the study, I got a p-value of 0.0017. The precise definition of this, and if you don't quite get this, that's fine. What it's saying is it's a percent, so you can shift a decimal to a percent by putting it over there. That would be 0.17%. 0.17% of what? Well, what that's saying is if this first scenario is the actual truth, I mean, one of these two is true, right? We might not be able to know what it is, but one of these are true. And if this is the true situation, that I am getting enough deep sleep, well, then there's only a 0.17% chance of getting data this far away from 90 minutes per night. So my sample average was a little under 78 minutes with this kind of sample size. There's only a 0.17% chance, less than a 1% chance that I would get data like this if this is the true situation. By randomness alone. I mean, it's possible. It's possible I am getting enough deep sleep, and just pure randomness, the nights I picked, I happen to get low amounts. But that doesn't appear likely, less than 1% chance. And since that doesn't seem likely to happen by random chance alone, we say that probably this null hypothesis is not true. We reject the null. But if this situation isn't true, what does that leave us with? That leaves us with the alternative or research hypothesis being probably true, and that's that I don't get enough deep sleep. So that's a starting point. It's nice. What Matulsky is arguing is that you really shouldn't end there, and I think wisely so. He says, let's move on to a even more important question. How much deep sleep am I getting per night? Not just, okay, I'm not getting enough deep sleep. Well, I kind of want to know exactly where I am on this, but am I getting like critically under the recommended amount? Am I just tucked here right below the recommended amount? We've already seen with my particular test that I'm probably to the left of this line. Before I collected the data, it would have been possible that I was getting enough, or maybe I was like getting way more than I needed. But we kind of want to know where, or I kind of wanted to know where I fell on this scale here of how many minutes I was getting per night. So let me bring that output up again. The sample mean I already pointed out to you. That's actually our best guess at the population mean. The sample mean is our best guess at the population mean. My population mean in this situation is how many minutes of deep sleep do I get per night in general? Not just the 25 nights that I recorded my Fitbit data on, but in general, which is a much more important question for me than just those 25 nights. And that sample average of 78 minutes per night of those 25 nights I collected data, that's my best guess at how much deep sleep I get per night in general. But I also know that those 25 nights don't speak for all the possible nights I could measure my data, right? And that's what the confidence interval tells us. So it's this range of values here. In this case, it was between 71 and 84. And so I'm saying, yeah, here's my best guess at how much sleep I'm getting. But my confidence interval kind of gives me a lower bound and an upper bound. And I'm pretty sure that this confidence interval captures the true amount of sleep I'm getting. Well, if I'm pretty sure that the confidence interval captures how much sleep I'm getting, I could know a couple more things than I could just by saying I wasn't getting enough deep sleep. For one, you can see that even in the best case scenario, I'm probably not getting more than 85. And so this is the connection with the null hypothesis. If that value of 90, that null hypothesis value, is outside of the confidence interval, in other words, if the entire confidence interval doesn't even include the null hypothesis, that's another way we would know to reject. Just by looking at this picture, without looking at the p-value, I would know to reject, because even in the best case scenario, I'm only getting 84, 85 minutes of deep sleep per night, and that's still less than 90. So even in best case, I'm not getting enough deep sleep. So that would be a way to reject the null with the confidence interval if the null hypothesis mean isn't even inside the confidence interval at all. But I can also tell a little more than that. So that's kind of the bad news, is that I'm probably not getting the recommended. I'm not even getting within 5 minutes, even in the best case scenario. But worst case scenario, looks like I'm probably not getting less than 70. So if I'm looking at medical studies on critical shortages, less than an hour of deep sleep per night, I'm probably not in that range. So with the confidence interval, I can give myself a little better sense of how much I'm actually getting per night, instead of just saying, no, I'm not getting enough deep sleep per night. That's how to interpret the confidence interval. Now, what would happen if, let's say this had been my data. It wasn't, but let's say that my sample average was maybe 88 minutes on the nights I collected data, which, notice, is less than 90 minutes, but it's not convincingly less than 90 minutes. It's not enough to say, yeah, in general, you're getting less than the average recommended 90 minutes per night. And then I had a confidence interval. Let's say I had a confidence interval like this. How would I interpret that? Well, first of all, because 90 is the null hypothesis mean and it's inside this interval, if I had done the p-value, it wouldn't be less than 0.05. I wouldn't have had enough evidence to reject the null, because the null of 90 minutes is well within this confidence interval. It's very possible that I could be getting 90 minutes per night if I was getting this kind of sample data. So I wouldn't have rejected the null. But even if I didn't reject the null, I could look at this confidence interval and say, Okay, well, worst case scenario, I'm probably not getting less than 80 minutes a night. Best case scenario, I could even be getting a little bit more than the average per night. So it's inconclusive, but I do have a little bit of sense that it's probably not super bad here, and it's probably also not super good. I mean, this is the bare minimum, so if this was the situation, I'd be fairly sure I wasn't getting 100 minutes per night. Um, so this is how I would interpret. Instead of just failing to reject the null hypothesis, I could look more closely at the confidence interval and get a sense for roughly what we were looking at in terms of my average amount of sleep per night.